The U.S. State of the Union address signed, sealed, and delivered. The takeaways from Mr. Trump's speech right after the break and all the dramas. The U.S. President Donald Trump has delivered his third State of the Union address. On Tuesday night, his speech took place less than a day before the Senate is set to vote on impeachment charges against him. During the 80-minute-long speech, he touched on topics such as the economy, defense budget, and immigration. Mr. Trump struck an optimistic tone as he focused on promises he kept and also the economy. Of course, he's seeking re-election. And there were intense moments showing deep partisanship, to say the least. Take a look.
It was an extraordinary State of the Union address, one not probably seen before. It can be compared to a reality TV show with all of the high drama. Mr. Trump's address focused heavily on the economy, a central tenet of his re-election pitch.
Since my election, we have created 7 million new jobs, 5 million more than government experts projected during the previous administration. The unemployment rate is the lowest in over half a century. And very incredibly, the average unemployment rate under my administration is lower than any administration in the history of our country.
That was going down incredibly well with Republican senators, but on social media, there were a lot of people who were quick to fact-check the president. He also talked about defense spending. The U.S. president said he managed to convince allies to beef up security budgets, a pointed reference to NATO and the members' defense spending commitments.
We are also getting our allies, finally, to help pay their fair share.
Mr. Trump's speech was all about the portrayal of American renewal, with no mention of impeachment or investigations into his administration. Some said the address served a summary of his first 3 years as president, then a plan for the future. In a divisive election year, with little hope of a bipartisan legislative agenda, the political divide may just grow bitter and uglier.
Okay, the biggest takeaways from Trump's third State of the Union address. Let's loop in our panelists. Joining us in Iowa City, we have Timothy Hagel, professor of political science with the University of Iowa. In Chicago, we invited Laura Schwartz, political commentator who has worked at the White House during the Clinton years. And in Washington, D.C., Robert Moran, a partner with the Global Advisory Forum Brunswick Group. So I want to welcome to the three of you. Before we start anything, let's take a look at this moment which has been played and replayed on TV screens around the world. There were some dramatic moments during the President Trump's speech, which went viral on social media. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi appeared to be extending her hands to greet the president. Then he turned away. After that, when the president finished his speech, Mrs. Pelosi could be seen on camera ripping up the pages of Mr. Trump's speech.
Why did you rip the speech up, Madam Speaker?
But it was a courteous thing to do, considering the alternatives.
So, quite a moment. Actually, I didn't remember that much of what is being delivered in the State of the Union address, but rather the two dramatic moments. I guess the viewers around the world feel the same. So, Mr. Schwartz, is State of the Union address today and in the future going to be about content or drama only?
Well, in the Trump administration, it's absolutely all about the drama, because drama brings in ratings. Last night, we really saw the kickoff of the 2020 election campaign. Donald Trump gave some great red meat to his base supporters by not shaking Nancy Pelosi's hands. They loved it. And then Nancy Pelosi returned that gesture by tearing up the speech at the end, of which the base of the liberal left really, loved. And it definitely took away a lot of the steam of the actual speech itself. but it's tit for tat, and it's a sad day, honestly, that we have to talk about this the day after a State of the Union, which traditionally, given by presidents, is about the state of the country and where it will go, policies and different attributes of which can be implemented coming ahead. So while we are talking about this, and this is what is the thoughts of the day, it's too bad that we've strayed so far at this point from the reality of a strong union.
Mr. Moran, to you about also the latest situation. Do you think people are going to take a State of the Union seriously? After all, it is an important speech given by the president, and after all, both parties are likely to show their colors, you know, during the State of the Union address and also after that. What do you think?
So look, I think the State of the Union is still a very important speech. As you pointed out, the president is really setting the tone for his re-election, which is a textbook case of a president running for re-election based on a very strong economy at his back and making that case to the American public. Look, I'm an analyst and a strategist, and I don't think we should over-focus on some of the drama here. I think that's largely a distraction. We know that the American political landscape is polarized at this moment in time, but it has been in the past. And I think the bigger questions on the table now are, how strong is the president running into re-election? His approval ratings are pretty good right now. And who is his opponent likely to be? And I think those are the two big questions on the table.
Those two questions need to be answered. If we could take a look at the latest Gallup poll, it could probably provide some hint. The Gallup poll released Tuesday morning. 49% approve of Mr. Trump's performance, while 50% disapprove, and 94% polled Republicans approve, while just 7% of Democrats feel the same, and that 87% point gap is the largest ever measured in Gallup polling. So I want to go to you, Professor Hagel. We understand the president now is enjoying an approval rating that is lower than his predecessors at the same time of the year, or at the same time when they are trying to seek re-election. How shall we understand the current situation for the president, and how is that related to the content of this State of the Union address he chose?
Well, President Trump's ratings have always been very low. Part of that, of course, is because of the things that he's done has caused a lot of people to be very unhappy, and so, again, his ratings have been low all along. So the fact that they're creeping up now a little bit certainly bodes well for him, and a lot of people are suggesting as much. The economy is strong right now, although Democrats will try to poke holes in terms of this problem or that problem, but by and large, it's the economy that's going to be important for any president, really, that's running for re-election. That if you have a strong economy, it makes it very difficult to defeat an incumbent. Now, we've got a lot of time until the November election, so things could still happen, could have a downturn or a slowdown of some sort, or other problems that creep up. But right now, things look very good for the president.
Looking good, yes, indeed, especially if you look at the numbers, employment numbers and the growth numbers. However, Mr. Schwartz, since you're coming from the other party, it's likely that you have a very different answer, different interpretation. Tell me more about that. We also see the Democratic Party has already had their representative to speak against what is going on in the State of the Union address. But some say the issues are very dry, very dull, so not much attention will be paid to.
Well, it was really interesting last night, and just like the professor mentioned, the economy is good, the economy is strong. Say that, leave it there and move on. But the falsehoods that he had to enter into, you know, the wage growth, when adjusted for inflation, is no growth. The GDP has been slower than other presidents, including President Carter. So if he would just stick to the high points and the truths, he would be a lot better served in the next months leading up to the November election, because I think he created some really justified openings for whoever his challenger will be to go back and go into what he said and say, listen, you said this, but it's actually like this. And out on Main Street, people are asking about jobs and real wages for those jobs, as well as health care. Health care was something President Trump brought up last night and said that he would be protecting pre-existing conditions. Now, if you're a member of his base, you just take that in and you run with it. But if you're a Democrat or independent or independently minded, you say, well, listen, you're trying to strike down the Affordable Care Act as we speak and put an end to that. So they're really, I think, if you come from one area of the spectrum, yes, you're going to just love that speech. If you come from the other and use it strategically in a campaign, you can eventually take it and use it to your advantage by poking those holes and getting back to real people and the Main Street day-to-day look.
The Main Street is very interested not only in what's going on in the State of the Union address, Mr. Moran, but also what happened with the Iowa caucus not long ago. People are very confused. It seems that the parties, two of them, are being organized at this point at very different ways. Mr. Moran, your take about the Iowa caucus and the spillover effect about people's reactions towards State of the Union and the partisanship that is going on right now.
So look, I try not to get distracted by some of the things that I think the media is distracted with right now. So for example, the media is distracted right now with the counting of the votes and delegate selection in Iowa because of the new technology that was used in the Iowa caucuses. I think that's really
those are not
actually
important, but you know, those what's happening there really shows the organizational skills and the realities of one party, particularly in one of the most important states. A new app on the smartphone is wonderful, but certainly we have seen some interesting phenomenon there. Mr. Moran, people read something out of this.
Sure, but I mean, I think in the long run, and this is funny because I come out of Republican politics and I'm defending the Democrats here for a second. In reality, what's going on here is that the party decided to use an unproven new technology, a new app, and it didn't work so well. That happens in business all the time. To me, the bigger question is who's going to get the nomination. If you look at the polling data, the Democrats' strongest matchup against Trump is probably Biden, okay? And the Trump team would prefer probably Sanders as the matchup. Sanders and Buttigieg look like they're 1-2. We're still sorting that out in Iowa. Sanders is ahead in New Hampshire. We'll have to see how that plays out. But Biden has to start winning something here if he's going to get the nomination. If he doesn't get the nomination and Sanders wins, then that really helps Team Trump, because that's the matchup they want in swing states. It's important when we talk really quickly, when we talk about the president's approval numbers. Remember, it's a national election, but it's decided at the states. And so in reality, in a lot of these swing states, Trump is actually doing really well, and they want a matchup with Sanders because it gives them a capitalism versus socialism contrast. So Trump could still lose the popular vote but win in the Electoral College, and that's what's going on here, and they want the most favorable matchup. So to my mind, the issue is really not what happened in the Iowa caucus, but the internal dynamics within the Democratic Party and who that nominee will be.
Is that also your reading, Professor Hagel?
Yes, for the most part it is. That at this point, especially given the counting problems that we've had here in Iowa, the effect of the Iowa caucuses has been pretty much nullified at this point. We only have 71% of the results in, and at this point people have moved on to other issues. But what the Iowa caucuses really did was they gave people an opportunity to take, not just here in Iowa, but across the nation because of the media attention, to give people an idea as to what these candidates stand for. So yeah, at this point it looks like Biden is going to finish fourth here, and he did try a little bit towards the end in Iowa, but he hasn't really tried that much in New Hampshire. And if you finish fourth in Iowa, well down the pack in New Hampshire, it's going to be difficult for him to use South Carolina as his firewall. As was indicated, Biden has to be able to win somewhere if he's going to get the nomination and be essentially the establishment nominee.
Well, Professor Hagel, as you may know, the incumbent president certainly has an advantage over the other candidates in terms of international affairs. Now, we have seen this president already trying to lay his groundwork, whether that is about the phase one trade deal with China or, you know, the latest Middle East plans and things like that. But one has to say none of these did not finish without controversies. So, Professor Hagel, how much will this time in this election, when America First was originally the slogan of this president, likely to be influenced by international issues, whether it's trade or geopolitics?
By and large, not that much. That for the most part, and you kind of hit on it at the end of that question, where to the extent that foreign policy or particular foreign trade makes a difference, it's how it affects the individual voters, Main Street, as was indicated before.
Yeah.
And we see that here in Iowa with the agricultural industry, where that certainly whatever's going on with China in particular or other countries, Canada and Mexico and the USMCA deal, that yes, that's all foreign policy, foreign trade, but the question for Iowa farmers is how does it affect us, or producers and processors? And that's really the big issue. And now with those things signed, even though the road was a little bit bumpy to get those signatures or to get that agreement together, that now if it's starting to turn a profit or be good for the farmers, then it's a plus for the incumbent, in this case Donald Trump.
Yeah, Ms. Schwartz, your take?
Yeah, I think so too, but again, it depends on what happens in the next, 10 months. Will they see the turnaround that quickly from something like that? Because unless they see a turnaround in their pockets, just like Professor Moran was, or Professor Nagel was talking about, you have to see the impact on a local level. But the incumbent definitely has the upper hand when things like this are occurring within this time frame. But I have to say, the better that Trump does in the polls, I think that really is better for Joe Biden, because just like Mr. Moran was saying, Bernie Sanders, the socialist, the party is not crazy about having him being the standard bearer, but the more Trump improves his ratings, the more I think Democrats will wake up and say, listen, his chances against Biden are much better to lose than against a Bernie Sanders, where he might take it. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out to Joe Biden's benefit.
Right. From now until the election, of course, this is not only the content of the State of the Union, but it's beyond State of the Union. Mr. Moran, a lot of things could happen given the frequency of big events and drama we have seen all over the world since the very beginning of this year. So, Mr. Moran, how should we look at the current level of discussion, if I could use that very polite word, inside your country going on right now? And how is it likely, do you think, some of the biggest events that you know already, or some of the barometers you know already, to influence the final result? Mr. Moran?
Right. In the United States, as Professor Hagel noted, most presidential elections, and in fact most elections, are decided by internal domestic discussions and how Americans are thinking about their local economy and the national economy. The United States and China are huge countries, and they tend to focus really on their own internal markets and issues. With all that said, there are a number of what people would call black swan events that could happen in the next 10 months or so, 9 months or so, that could impact the outcome. The biggest is if we get a global deceleration in the global economy, and if that impacted the United States and how that could impact the American economy and American workers. That would have the biggest impact on President Trump. But there's also questions around how other trade deals or the progress on those could impact the president. And then there are just other things that happen in the course of just time, and how the president handles those events, which would go directly to his stewardship and leadership characteristics as judged in the voting booth.
I see.
And time will tell on those.
I guess time will tell. Thank you so much for now, though, the three of you helping us to understand the latest. Timothy Hagel, Laura Schwartz, and Robert Moran. Really appreciate it. Thank you.